That could be because I use different
Oh,
cables.
we're live.
1, 2, 3. Where are we? We're live. Are we live?
Yes, we're
Of
live.
course. Of course, it doesn't work.
Mhm, mhm.
Well, we'll just have to do it the long way, guys. Good evening and welcome to Chasing Prophecy on FM 105.3 in New Orleans, where we discuss anything and everything beyond the scope of normal. I'm Jenny Nicasio along with my co-hosts, Sean Kelly and John Ventry. Happy New Year.
Same to
Yeah.
you.
Happy New Year's. Hi, Gary. How you doing?
I'm glad to see everybody's back online. Unfortunately, my camera is not working because I do not have a camera that's compatible with Windows 11. So I got a new computer, but the camera's messed up. So hopefully I'll get that straightened out soon.
I hope so too. I hope so too.
I hope everybody had a good New Year.
I'll tell you what,
Um,
I don't want to see pork anymore. I'm
No
serious. Oh my God, I'm porked out.
Oh,
You know what? God bless those pigs. That's all I can say. Cause
Is pork a big deal on New Year's Eve?
oh
on the
yeah, it's
menu?
oh yeah,
tradition. Good
absolutely.
luck.
Pork. Okay.
Yeah, it's for good luck. You're supposed to have it. It's supposed to be good for good luck.
Well, that's why I never ate it.
Maybe you should have some tomorrow.
It
Not
don't
that I
work that way
Not
sometimes.
that I know.
Well, that's a shame. Oh, what are you going to do? Well,
Nah.
so many things are happening. Did you hear anything about that UFO sighting, John? That we well, it wasn't a U. What is it? A AR. What is it?
Forget about UAP. I don't care about their new terminology, which is actually old terminology. But where was it?
I think it was in Nevada, if I'm not mistaken. Arizona, maybe. I'm not
I
sure.
don't know. I didn't see anything.
I heard about it, but it was on New Year's. You never know. There's so many crazy stuff happening already in the
Well,
news.
you know what? They're grabbing every little thing now and saying it's a UFO. It's a UFO. So I don't know. The government's trying to push this narrative, and it's a cover
Well,
for their military. That's what it is.
I
uh,
believe that's the case too.
Yeah.
Gary says, "Great tonight. How is everybody there?" So Gary
Well,
wants
we're
to know
glad
how
to
you
s-
two are
Good.
doing.
we're hanging in there. Hopefully, it'll be a good year, better than last year. I'm hoping.
Yeah. Stock market didn't start off too good.
No.
You know, how about that football player, Damar Hamlin?
Oh yeah, that was
Yeah.
crazy.
Honest to God, man, 24 years old. And here's what's the really weird thing about it was a doctor explained that he got hit at the moment when I guess the heart wasn't moving or something like that. It
In
was
between beats.
yeah,
Wow.
and that's what happened. But 24 years, God bless him. God bless his family.
What's
I
the
said
update?
so
What's
personally.
the update on him? Do you
Well,
know?
he got, from what I understand and from what I read so far, that his vitals came back, but he's
Okay.
still in critical condition. So who
But
knows?
and the way the conspiracy. That's why you can't believe anything on the internet. Right away, they said he was vaccinated and it was from the vaccine.
Yeah, my brother told me that earlier.
Well,
Yeah.
was it?
I don't know if he was vaccinated, but I didn't see the hit. I didn't see the replay. But I would think if the guy slammed into him and
It
that
wasn't
happened.
that hard though, John. I seen
Oh,
it.
it
I saw it
wasn't.
multiple. No, it was not that
No, it
hard.
wasn't hard at all. I
Oh,
mean, it
maybe
was
it is then, because I
it
didn't see
was
it.
it was a typical football tackle is what it
Well,
was.
then you know
Yeah.
what? Then maybe the kid was vaccinated because there's a lot of issues with young people and the vaccine.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing a lot of that too, which is very scary.
But
Yeah, it
all we
is.
got to do is we can pray for his family and
Yeah.
him. That's what
We
we
just have
need.
to pray
Yeah.
for his family. Hopefully
And
everything
even
will
that
be
quarterback, Nick Foles, he got tackled and he went into convulsions.
Yeah,
And
Oh, wow.
yeah,
yeah.
I don't know if he broke a rib or bruised ribs, but he's out too.
Oh, that's a shame. So many weird stuff is happening already.
Yeah.
I mean, we're losing a lot of people. But I thought it was really odd that, I mean, when the Pope, uh, Benedict, what was his name, John Benedict? Was
Yeah,
it?
Benedict. Yeah.
John
He
Benedict.
passed
Yeah,
away. But someone said, what if it would have happened when if he hadn't resigned?
Well,
You know,
then that's the papal prophecy that
yeah,
he's
that's the
supposed to
papal
be the,
prophecy.
yeah,
That's
Malachi Martin.
uh-huh. And a lot of people think that's the end of it all, but we'll find out if we're
Well,
entering in
other
that.
people said he actually was the last real pope because this pope here is, he don't really stick to the teachings.
Uh,
He's very wishy-washy.
exactly, that's what I feel. But there's so many things are already happening, and I don't know. I find New Year's Eve to be rather depressing.
I don't do anything. I mean,
me
Christmas.
neither. I was in bed at 9:30.
Yeah, I was about saying 10 o'clock, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, Christmas Day. There's no family here. So it's
Mhm.
like I watch what's on TV, and then it's like I'm going to bed.
Yeah, well, I had my family here, and it was I don't know, it's odd.
Yeah, well,
No,
New Year's
no.
Eve is it's
I
odd.
haven't lost anybody recently, so
Thank God.
yeah.
Thank
I'm
God.
just saying.
It's tough when you lose somebody and you try to carry on the traditions. Like my mother, she did everything, and now I'm trying to be that. It's like the passing of the guard. The changing of the
Yeah.
guard. Like, oh, I can't do what my mom did. I'm not. I can't do it. I tried
Well,
my best, and I hope I did a good job. But
even for me, Christmas has always been a downer because for 29 years since I got divorced, the kids were with my ex. So I got
mhm,
them for Thanksgiving. So I haven't celebrated Christmas maybe twice in 29 years. So,
mhm.
because the kids are never with me. A couple of times they were. So to me, Christmas is nothing. I just
It's
want to
just
get it
another
over with.
day.
Yeah, because
Well,
I
A
don't
lot
see
of
the
people
family.
feel that way. It's tough. There's a lot of people suffering out there, and a lot of depression during the
Yeah, I
yes.
agree.
holidays, and
I
a lot of
agree.
people cannot wait for it to be over. And
Yeah.
it's a lot of work and a lot of preparation, and putting the house in order is going to be tough. I find that to be very hard. It might take me a couple weeks to
Hmm.
do that because it takes
Well,
me a long time.
Well, that's the plus. I've put my tree up 3 times in the last 29 years.
Oh,
So
jeez.
I don't have to take it down.
Well, we're going to talk tonight about a lot of I wouldn't call it prophecies. I would call it predictions for the new year. And we have Jeff Harman back on the show, and he's going to discuss the outlook for 2023 and various energies that are likely going to affect that. So, without further ado, let me go ahead and bring him on. Just bear with me because, like I said, I'm using a new computer and it's not very easy. And I like my Windows 10 better. But welcome to Chase and Prophecy. Mark, how are you tonight?
I'm
Yeah.
doing good. Thanks for having me.
Happy New
Hey,
Year.
Good
yeah.
to see you.
Hey, Happy New Year to you too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
even
good.
though it's a Gregorian calendar New Year, but yeah, it's good.
Yeah, well, I'm not really sure what that is, so you're gonna have to explain that one for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Well,
there's
so
the,
other
the calendar
cultures.
was
Yeah.
after Pope Gregory.
Yeah.
So-
I mean, the Jewish New Year is until like 2 weeks or 10 days from now, right? I think something like that.
no, Rosh Hashanah's already long past. That
Oh,
was
that
back.
already passed.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's already long gone.
Well,
Yeah,
the Chinese New Year, I think, is the 25th
yeah,
of
something like
January.
that. Yeah,
New
so
Year, old year.
we may be
s-
celebrating that sooner than we think. They might
Yeah.
take over.
oh,
It's
you know what? Up here,
when we're not looking.
well, let me ask you something before we get started, Jeff. We had a psychic on the show last week, and she was discussing saying that 2023 was going to be the worst year yet, and she predicted that we are going to get into not so much what did she say we're going to get into it with Russia. There was another
Yeah.
yeah,
It
we're going
was
to get
it
into a
was with
conflict
Russia.
or war with Russia. What do you think about that?
Well, from the looks of the astrology, it looks pretty dicey. I'll tell you that. It really does. Yeah, it's I think that we're going to see some real terrorist stuff, and that's what the owners want to get us into. They want to get us into a war.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what,
They're staring us into.
Yep, Jeff. If you remember about a year ago, Russia and China had a meeting, right? And then
That's right.
maybe it was a month, 2 months later, Russia invades the Ukraine. And I think the deal was China was going to watch it very closely to see if we just kind of gave Ukraine away. And the deal was they were going to invade Taiwan. So they still may do that because I think that was the deal between Putin and Xi was to invade both those countries.
Yeah. It's some dicey stuff. Everybody seems to be dancing to some people at the top of the pyramid. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I figure then if they do that, we can invade Cuba. Then we can have the baseball team in Havana, and that'd be a great series between Miami and Havana. See, I always find a bright side. Even with global warming, I tell people I just want to take the cruise from Boston around the Northwest Passage and come out the other side.
Well, I want to apologize for one because I called you Mark for some reason. I don't know why I called you Mark.
You
I
call
think
me
I did
whatever
that
you
last
want.
time. I think I
don't
did that
care.
before.
You can call me anything you want. I don't care.
Jeff.
Just keep the expletives out of it on the air. That's all.
Mark Harman. See,
I
I've been
think
called a
that's
lot
Mark
of stuff
Harman.
in my
I don't know.
lifetime.
Mark Harman.
I think
Hey,
I
Jeff,
know.
Mark Harman's a settlement.
You never met my old man. You should hear the names he invented for all of us kids.
Oh,
Jeff,
jeez.
can you? I don't really understand astrology, and I see it referenced all through Greek and Roman time, and I think even the Bible sometimes refers to when the stars are aligned or certain whatever. But explain how it works, because to me, they're trillions of miles away. I look up, so what? I see stars. How does it work?
Are we on the air yet?
Yeah, we're on.
Absolutely.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
We should have
Well, that's a really good question because, hard physicists, a really dear friend of mine just passed away. His name was Claude Swanson. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He was making the rounds on coast to coast, and he was promoting his books, which are really good books, The Synchronized Universe and Paths of the Soul. He had a lot of great books out. And I have him actually on my YouTube channel, Jeff Harman Astrologer on YouTube. So if you ever want to check him out, but he and I had some wonderful discussions. And also I had given some talks at IONS a while back, of course, to astronaut Edgar Mitchell. And everyone brings this stuff up. What is astrology? The gravity, the planets are so far away. How could it work, right? And I really think you can't look at gravity. All the hard sciences look at energies that dissipate like the inverse square law. It dissipates with distance, right? So you can't apply that to, well, you can in some senses in location astrology, but this stuff is really, when you get into the ancient world, particularly, and it's not that ancient, probably prior to the 1700s, the Industrial Revolution really began astrologically right about when George Washington was fighting for the British in the French Indian War, which was right about 1762. And what's interesting about that, there all the way back to the flood of Noah, it was talked about how the conjunctions, meaning the alignments of Jupiter and Saturn, would really show the points in, you could say, the world that changed. So here's the thing. Everyone today is thinking, gravity. They're thinking all these waves and energy and frequencies, which, there's all of that too. But the ancient world prior to that, particularly the Masons and the Rosicrucians and the Egyptians and the Chaldeans and the Vedas, all these wonderful ancient societies that knew that this was really hierarchies of angels. And I don't think you can put this in a scientific context quite the way we think in the modern world, because they would literally talk about how all the planets would have archangels, angels, spirits, and intelligences. They were literally a hierarchy. And, everybody runs around in the modern world calling themselves Libras and Scorpios and Aries and, the sun sign, love, light, and clueless astrology. And the ancient world never had that. They never, ever came close to that. It was always looking at the chart, particularly in India. That's the stuff that I love an awful lot is it's called Vedic astrology.
Yeah, Vedic.
And there's many branches of that. There's Parashara, that's named after Maharishi Parashara, and then Maharishi Jaimini. But the one that really intrigues me the most is the Nadi astrology. I mean, I remember years ago, I had this teacher who was an old man who actually did astrology for the Rothschilds. I shouldn't mention that on air, but I will. He was really an amazing guy. And he would take charts and do astrology like I have never seen before. And ever since that time, I've been enamored with Nadi astrology. He would literally say, oh, this person will get married here. They'll do this there. They'll get sick there, and they'll die about here. And I'd go, okay. And then I would test him with different charts, and he'd be right on. Like, he would explain things about, the childhood, the education, the profession, the parents. I do readings all the time using these techniques, and everybody tries to deify me, and I go, hey, whoa. I said, I am just the mailman, and I was blessed to learn this stuff, and no one will ever fully learn it. I'm very humbled at how sacred of a science this is. So you're really looking at, what is astrology? It's the science of the soul. And that's exactly what Vedic astrology, its true name was. It was called Jyotisha, which is a strange word in Sanskrit that means the science of the light of the soul. In fact, a friend of mine, Chakrapani, if anyone listening is familiar with him, he was quite well known. He was in Santa Monica. And I really liked Chakrapani. We'd go out to dinner, he and Howard Beckman and a few other astrologers. And he's the guy who probably coined that phrase in the 60s. He said, Americans are never going to know what Jyotisha means, so we'll call it Vedic astrology. And that really stuck. And that's really what it is. It's truly a matrix. I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus, even though it was a great movie, especially the first one. But I always say, really, it's the science of the soul. And the astrology is not us. It's really the angelic forces that were in play that are reflective of the soul's position in its path. And that's a lot different than, you're a Pisces or an Aries.
Yeah. Let me ask you something else. I read something recently that said that some souls are much more powerful than others. And some people were actually, born to be leaders. They have a much higher, stronger soul. And then I'm thinking, well, you got 9 levels of angels and demons. And then in India, you got the caste system. And I don't know a lot about Vedic. Maybe they have a system like that too. I mean, it really shows that there's not a whole lot of equality then, right? So why do you think that they have these caste system levels of angels? It's very unequal to me, and
it is.
But apparently is that the way it is? Because some people do have much more aggressive souls. They're born to be leaders. It's like you just look at him and said, that guy's presidential.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Look at, everybody hates it. I can't bring him up. But when Donald Trump won, I said he's going to win. Why? Because he had a primary direction. Yeah. And we all have primary directions. See, when we're spanked on the rear end in the delivery room, the celestial imprint is not us. I think it's reflective of where the soul is. I mean, this is really a matrix of souls. And what's interesting is, as we live, each year equals a rotation of a day on the Earth's axis. And if you're a flat earther, it's still the celestial model. And these progressions are profound. I mean, they're profound. I was a skeptic of astrology. I got into astrology in the mid 70s, and my mother, I grew up in northern Wisconsin. It was like Dukes of Hazzard up there, right? And it was crazy, a lot of fun. And snowmobiles, motorcycles, cars, and I drove semis before I drove cars. My dad had a logging company, so I didn't believe in any of this stuff. My mother, when I started driving in the 70s, my mother, would peg my girlfriends. Well, that girl's like this. And I go, well, how do you know? And it would be so specific. And, you're not going to get along, or you're going to like her, or whatever, and really deep personality traits. And I go, what the heck are you doing? And she goes, well, I've got their astrology charts. And I said, come on, that stuff doesn't work. Same thing like you guys are saying, the gravity's too weak and all that stuff, and she says, no. She says, just give it a shot and understand this before you get into it. So I did. And I have to say, it really changed my mind. And then by the late 70s, we thought we were cool because we had the Commodore 64. And then we went to the 128. Remember those, the floppy disks and all that.
Yeah.
And then finally, in the 80s, I was using the DOS programs, and I met Robert Hand and the whole camp of translators out of Hebrew and Latin and all this stuff. And we started really looking into the ancient world. And I love Robert Hand. He's one of the 3 Roberts who were kind of responsible for bringing and reviving the ancient world, though that happened prior to that. But Pingree back in the 70s and many other professors had done that. But it was really a journey for me because it was like, wow. And then at the time in the 80s, I had a recording studio and we were doing all kinds of commercial work. I was doing acoustical design work. I even got to do forensics work for state and county and federal work. I went from, recording rock and roll bands to going in state and federal prisons, voice printing people. It was pretty bizarre, but a lot of fun. And what was so fun for me was the parallel journey of this linear left brain world and science. And I actually was teaching a physics class at Carthage College. I had a school that we taught audio engineering. And I loved it because, you got this left brain, hard science world. And then over on the other side, I got my mother and all this esoteric research I was doing. I'd see people coming in the studio who, were, college graduates playing violins on commercials. And then I'd get some guy with a bone in his nose from a punk rock band. And I was always in their charts. And I'm like, wow. And back to what you said before, I think what's so stunning about Vedic astrology is I don't believe the astrology is limiting us. I think the astrology is reflective of where the soul is. Is there a way I can share a screen? I could show you something really fast.
Yeah, no problem. I can help you. Go ahead and what do you want to? I think
just share a screen.
Yeah.
How do I do that?
Yeah, you should be able to on your end by saying it says share screen.
I see present settings.
Presents. On presents.
Present. There we go. Share the screen. Perfect. Let me just do this really quick because this, I think, sets it up so much better. I'm going to share the entire screen. There we go. So there we go. Perfect. So now let me jump over here. This diagram, I think, sets it forward so elegantly. This is one of my favorite diagrams to show people. Let me see if I can find a doggone thing. This one right here, no matter what your religious beliefs are, in a lot of ways, I'm with George Carlin. The best thing to come out of the religions was the music. But not that there isn't a lot of wonderful things in religions. And, back in the 80s, I actually was hired I actually got to record Mother Teresa and film her in the early 80s. She had just won the Nobel Peace Prize. And a lot of people think she was a child trafficker. Now, I can't speak to that, but my opinion is I don't believe that. I think she might have, unbeknownst, had something like that happen in her organization, but I don't believe Mother Teresa was a child trafficker.
No.
I get a hard time with that.
Her, like the whole Catholic, they get infiltrated. They don't recruit these people. They are targeted and get infiltrated.
You are so right. And I have to tell you, I'll speak a little bit out of school here. I was hired by a number of very high-level religious, like Jesuit and societies that my studio was hired to do filming and recording of many retreats at very high level, Jesuits out of Rome. And you mentioned Malachi Martin when I was in the room, and fun stuff because Malachi Martin was a very interesting man. And I got to meet Mother Teresa. I was filming on Lake Michigan, just north of Chicago, a little town called Kenosha, Wisconsin. And the guy who hired me said, Jeff, make sure you got all the film and the videotapes and the audio tapes are ready because we got a very important guest. He wouldn't tell me. And all of a sudden the police show up with bomb sniffing dogs and everything else. And long story short, hugging Mother Teresa and filming her for like 2.5 hours. And she was a really wonderful lady. I don't care what anybody says. My opinion was she didn't like all the attention at all. I think she was quite potentially unhappy with the just stop for a minute. I think she was unhappy with the publicity she got, because I noticed a lot of the people were running around getting that photo op with Mother Teresa, and I could see the unhappiness in her face. And she hardly said a word in the 2.5 hours that we filmed this roundtable in the top of this mansion. And I know, because I was right there, running cameras and making sure all the guys were doing stuff right. And so I got to really watch her and study her. And my opinion was she wasn't too happy with the publicity, and I think she was kind of ushered in. But anyways, not to get so far off track, the bottom line is, and why I brought her up is, I noticed, it's a business. A lot of these religions are businesses. There are a lot of wonderful people in religions, but God always needs money, doesn't he?
Hey,
But and I noticed they
Jeff,
never raise extra guy. Yeah.
Neil Carr has a question. He says, what are your opinions of astrotheology being the basis of the 4 Gospels, as well as the 15 other religions predating Christianity?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to it. I think some of the oldest texts that I know of are the Puranas in India. Of course, the Rig Vedas and the Ajur Vedas, Samhitas, they're really old. In fact, there are maybe 20,000 plus documents in the Madras Library in India. Nobody knows how to even translate them. They can't even figure them out. And they're all they're cryptographic. And one of the oldest texts that kind of pertains to that, they don't call it astrotheology, but is the Sefer Ratziel. That's called the Book of the Archangel Ratziel, which is believed to rule the 8th sphere outside of the solar system and literally the fixed stars. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And the book is chock full of angels. And now you start seeing what goes on in Egypt. They would salutate the sun at sunrise and all the angels at noon, at sunset, at midnight. And they knew that all these spirits and angels were involved in the astrology, or in the heavens, if you will. It's very interesting stuff, and it's all angels. And I've had the blessing of doing this kind of work now for a long time. It's getting close. God, I can't believe it. Almost a half a century. It's like 47 years since I was exposed, going on 40. And it's really been profound to see that the more I get into it, the more you realize you don't know, and the more you realize how divine and vast this all is. And I want to show you, that's what I was about to do a minute ago. I just didn't want to stay on that diagram. Let me just show you. I got to do this again. Excuse me here. There we go. Bing bong. Now we've got it. So I can, am I sharing? I think, yes, I am. So let me dart back over here. This diagram is really kind of simplistic, but it's really demonstrative of how I think it's quite possible the hierarchy might work. Whatever your belief in God is, divine light, all-seeing light, whatever, Jesus, Buddha, whatever, divine light or divinity or something very, very intelligent and divine is above all creation, is the theology. Then we see down here, these are the light coming down. And of course, a lot of people think this is the Kabbalah, but it's really, really just ancient sacred wisdom. They say our soul is created right here. And this is, there's no astrology up here. There's a world called Absolute, and these are the angels believed to rule them, the seraphims, cherubims, and the thrones. And it's interesting, if you go into other cultures, particularly like the Vedantic, the Tamil, Dravidian, and Sanskrit, you'll find they got the same general model. They just call them different. We call them angels, they call them deities. So they claim there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions up here, and it's exceedingly vast beyond human comprehension. The next world's down, Bryos, where the waters of creation get more dense. These are the angels that rule it. It's way down here, hundreds of dimensions below your soul is believed to be created, is the Yetziratic world. And many people will have heard of a book called the Sefer Yetzirah, which Sefer's book in Yetzirah just means formation, or you could say the solidification of matter. And this is where the rotating galaxies, the amino acids, the black holes, the stars, all that stuff appears to be. And we don't even know how big the universe is. Many people speculate. I certainly don't know. And our Milky Way, and the speck edge of it could be way down here, just metaphorically. And here's what's mind blowing: they claim there could be 49 parallel universes and 49 subdimensions in each one. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that's way beyond my little noodle being able to comprehend. So that's a lot. And the last worlds, Asaya, is known as the astral planes. Now, this is the place where the ghosts and the spirits and the demons and all the stuff we hear about happens. And of course, we're in these meat suits called bodies, right? Well, here's the legend, and I don't think this is a legend. There's a text called the Legends of the Spirit and the Soul. It's called the Sefer Haggadah, and it dates way back to the Egyptian and on and on. And they claim an angel selects the soul out of what we call time. In other words, we're not in it. There is no time other than the mechanics of the celestial rotation of the earth and the cycles of the moon and the year. So they say that angel actually attaches the spirit, psyche, and soul by silver cord to the embryo in mom's womb at conception. But it's not fully there. It's just by silver cord. In the 9 months or whatever it ends up being, gestation, which most women know, it's, a lot. And when that water breaks, that baby's got to come out pretty doggone soon, or you're going to have trouble for both the mother and the baby. And they say that is actually timed by that angel. And when the child exits the womb, it's at first breath that the spirit is tied in, and the psyche and the soul, but the celestial imprintation, in other words, the position of the earth and all the celestial alignments are commensurate with that soul's, you could say, reflective energy. So all these astrologers running around saying, oh, you're a Pisces in air. It's exactly I think it's exactly opposite. I think we are a reflection of the celestial heavens at the time that we were put in these bodies. And then we're knocked out. And this is all really well described in a Hebrew text, Aramaic and Hebrew text, called the Sharei Hagilgam, which means the gates of reincarnation. And our fine bearded men in Rome have told us there's no reincarnation. You're all sinners and you're all going to hell, right? But you got to pay us first, so we'll get you a good seat. But in all seriousness, it's kind of how it is. And
Yeah.
it's like I love the Blues Brothers. Remember, no problem. We'll get you $5,000. Whack, and then they beat the crap out of them. The Blues Brothers was the best one. But anyhow, long story short, I believe that's how it is. And the Vedic astrology, particularly the old stuff, not the more modern translations, but the Nadi astrology, it's so accurate. It's creepy. It's creepy. People will say to me, Jeff, how did you know my dad was this way? Well, look at the chart. Don't deify me. If you learn this, you also would see that they're called planetary combinations, called yogas. They're just combinations, and they're really interesting. It's all arranged by the degrees and minutes through what we call the zodiac, and more importantly, something called the lunar mansion. And
hey, hold on before you take off. Put that slide back up, because I got a question. The one you just had up there for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I got a question. Why are principalities missing? They should have been between powers and archangels. You're missing a level there of principalities.
Well, they actually call these different things. I've heard the seraphims and the cherubims and the thrones also be referred to as the orphanum. So they're in there. It's just, I don't want to get the diagram too complex.
Well, there should be nine levels of angels. That's I just noticed. There should be another principalities between powers.
Yeah, there's a lot to angels, and there's a lot of different versions. So you certainly, these are the older major classifications, and there's orphanum in there. There's the holy, you could say hyothine animals. There's a lot that I haven't put in here, and I'm not claiming this is definitive, but you're clearly it's exceedingly complex. And this diagram is so simplistic to the way it probably really is. This is a way to wrap our lower conscious minds around an exceedingly complex matrix of creation.
Jeff,
again, leave
yeah,
that up.
Neil Carr has not a question, but he wants to ask this to you. I think it's incredible that something divine has revealed this archetypal, whatever, story of the sun and the 12 zodiac signs. It makes him wonder if other star systems also have very similar zodiacs.
That is a good question. I can only speak to this. There are secret societies, and I have some of these texts where there are other reference points where there's 13 signs. You've got the 28 lunar mansions that the Egyptians and the Chaldees had, and the ancient worlds, even in India. One of the oldest, and I agree. I think if we only know what we know, and I believe that there are probably many, many worlds. In fact, I know they are in my own heart. I've had, you could say, experience with that in an astral sense, that there are other places like that.
Hey, Jeff, you know what I find interesting too is when you talk about the fallen angels, right? And in the Bible, it says our battle is against powers and principalities, right? I've always taken that to mean that the fallen angels were the bottom four levels: angels, archangels, principalities, and powers. That's why the battles between powers and principalities, the more stronger of the fallen angels. Even though Lucifer was a seraphim, the other cherubim, thrones, dominions, virtues did not go with Satan in the fall. That's the way I've always read that. The battle is between powers and principalities. So it was the bottom four levels, not the top five that were involved in the fall, other than Satan, who was a cherubim.
Yeah, the books of Enoch get into some really cool stuff about that. Yeah.
And just one more comment before you move on. When you talked about the soul and the silver cord and the soul entering at the point of birth, I can tell you that that's correct because the day that my daughter gave birth to my first grandson, I was waking up, and right before I woke up, I saw the silhouette of a woman, and she says to me, she's in a field of butterflies right now.
Wow.
And I wake up and I said, what the hell does that mean? So I tried texting my daughter. Later, when I got my daughter, she was in labor right then, and I looked up, what do butterflies mean? Butterflies symbolize a child, the birth of a child, the soul entering the birth of a child. So what's the odds of me having that vision at the moment that she's delivering? So, and I think the soul goes in at that moment that the kid has its first breath, at delivery.
It certainly gets tied to it. You are so right. I have to tell a quick story. My son, who's now just 21, and he'll be entering his 22nd year soon. My wife, I actually looked at her birth chart and said, you've got I met her at a gas station in Malibu, right? And that sounds, gas stations don't sound too sexy, but when you throw Malibu in there, I guess it works. So, so we met, and then we ended up having a child 3 years later, and she was pregnant, and I got to we actually picked the time to conceive, which I do that for a lot of women. Especially now, I've actually worked with doctors, and we pick astrological times to inseminate, or couples can do prayers and try and attract a soul that's more maybe beneficial to their evolution. And it's really interesting is conception. The Egyptians knew was really important, and most astrology there's calculations. Ptolemy and Dorotheus and other Egyptians had formulas for calculating backwards reverse engineering from the first breath to figure out when that conception might have been. So I was lucky I got to pick the conception time. And when my son was ready to be born, Camille's only 5'1", and my kid was like almost 9 pounds, a little over.
Wow.
And so it was a big baby. And what happened was we had to induce, and I knew she was going to go C-section. So I said, God, if you can have that child within this window of time with the C-section, he's going to be born with the moon conjuncting exalted Venus and some other good yogas in the chart. And that's what happened. Well, here's the thing. I actually, in the delivery room, the doctor thought I was crazy. I took in some, they're called ancient angelic squares that are believed to push back the demonic forces that are actually connected with the moon's angularity and the Earth's angularity. It's called the demon Nama, and there's many legends about that. And it's believed to protect the child. So I put them on the four walls to the doctor. I said, "Do you mind if I put these up?" He looked at me and goes, "What the heck are those?" He said, "Yeah, go ahead." He said, "I don't care. As long as you don't get in my way, I'm good." So, okay, great. So I put them up, and I'm holding her hand, and they put the epidural, prior to that. And I got to watch around the tent. And it was pretty graphic when they cut someone open. I mean, it's pretty amazing how many fluids and tissues there are in the body. It's quite graphic. And they pulled my son out, and I could see the umbilical cord and all the water dripping. And all of a sudden, I never expected, I did not see any shapes or wings or anything. Two illuminations came in, and right when he cried, they joined. And the whole room illuminated. And every time I tell the story, I get goose pimples. It was so amazing. And I mean, literally, I remember they cut the umbilical cord really quick, cleaned her up, and they started sewing her up. And I went around and grabbed them, and you could just feel the blessed energy in a child. It's so powerful. See, that's where artificial intelligence is never going to be like that. We see the Boston Robotics, the robots flipping over, and the military's got some pretty advanced stuff right now. And I'm telling you, they're never going to instill a soul and a spirit. Now, they'll certainly beat us on the lower conscious level. I had an old guy that I had the blessings of working from. He was one of the top military developers of planned position radar in World War II. And he said, "Jeff, we did all these studies about how efficient a human being can be." He says, "We find no human being can be over 60% efficient." I said, "Geez, why is that?" "Well, we got to go to the bathroom. You get thirsty. You got to do this. You got to do that. You got to scratch your, so it's like we're not like machines, and we never will be. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience. So, Elon Musk and AI and Neuralink and all, it's coming. It's coming, folks. In fact, go ahead.
Those charts you put up during the delivery, do they go back to Enochian or the book of, I think it's Soiga, where they had these squares with angelic words writing in it, and each square represented one letter? I don't know if you're familiar with any of that, but it goes back to John
Those
Dee.
are,
John Dee and Enochian and all of that. Yeah, ciphers. Yeah.
Yeah, they're well, that's how it goes right back to antiquity. See, that's, when you look at what our fine bearded men in Rome, the men who were murdering each other for the first 300 years to decide what Christians might get to believe, they threw all that stuff in the garbage can. And I think one of the biggest problems with the Vulgate translations was you lost all the ciphers, gematria, numerology, and notricon that is encrypted in the Psalms. Talk about stuff that Rome won't even let in. They smack the Psalms in the middle of the Bible between the New and the Old Testament. And the shame is there's a book called the Shemush Tehillim, which is the Psalms. Shemush means like method of or something of the Psalms. Do you know that some of the Psalms may be 4,000 years old and no one knows? I certainly don't know. And there's angels encrypted in there. And this all gets into ancient magic because the angels that surround the firmament, the 72, are the goetic angels in Exodus. So you're all sinners and you're all going to hell isn't giving much, and there's nothing wrong with, the Christian messages and the messages of Moses, because they're all really based in a lot of truth. But the problem is, they don't tell us how to do anything, do they? Not a single thing other than, put your money in the basket when we pass. And I'm not here to bash religions because there's a lot of really good people in them, but there's also some very questionable political things that have been entered in, like Malachi Martin rightly said. He actually said they were trying to kill him.
Yeah.
And I think he was right.
Let me just go back for a second. Do you think, where does magic come from? Because I remember reading Ham, was he a son of Noah, had a book of magic. I mean, you're like, I don't know how many. The second generation, you have Noah and then Ham, so that's about 8, 9 generations in. But the second, generation off the ark, if it's true, he had a book of magic. Magic. So does
Oh, you bet.
magic? Where does it come from? Does it come from the devil?
It
Is
really,
magic?
well, that's an interesting thing.
Is it a trick?
I don't claim to know, but I can tell you what I do know. Apparently, every culture seems to have some similar parallel to the
Yeah.
Adam and Eve story. You go into the Vedanta, the war in heaven, the Bhagavad Gita has the same thing. The ancient Indians here in America and other places, the Chinese, they all have some story of a war with the angels and they were cast down. And what's interesting is when that happened, it really does appear that these guys, Lucifer, Satan, Belial, and Leviathan, were cast down. Now, what's been watered down, and there are some really smart rabbis that I've worked with who know a lot about gematria, and there's something called the Torah. Well, we know it in the West as the Old Testament. And there's a whole bunch more going on with that than meets the eye. There's gematria, which is, again, numerology. And there's ciphers where you literally drop the Aramaic and Hebrew through different codes, and you will end up with all these exceedingly complex matrices of angels that are interacting, and they're almost like gatekeepers. Well, where I think it came from was it appears, and this is my theory, I think the angels that were cast down, Lucifer, Satan, Belial, and Leviathan, are literally incarcerated here, not just in the earth, but in maybe this dimension of the universe at the very molecular level. Think about that. Every atom, so far as we know, is positive, negative, proton, neutron, right? I should say proton, electron. Everything, day and night, everything is juxtaposing forces.
Good and evil, everything.
Cain and Abel. So it's like they were imprisoned here. Not to be graphic, but go take a look at your garbage sometime. You'll see larvae, which turn into, of course, flies. And I hear Belial in many of these. See, there's these 4, and then there's 8 beneath them, and there's legions upon legions upon legions upon legions beneath them. And they appear to hate the human race. This is why we hear about the New One World Order. And I mean, look at George Soth. He looks like the Sith. I mean, in Star Wars, you can see the evil in some of these people.
Or Dracula in that one from 1992, the Bram Stoker's Dracula. It looks just like him.
They really look like that. I've actually seen people shapeshift. I've actually seen hands turn into claws. I've seen people like shoot up to like 8 feet tall in their auras. And you go, whoa, is that my imagination?
Wow.
But I know it's not, because I've seen them react that I saw they did that.
That's crazy, dude.
It is crazy. And we hear all these stories, with Tartaria and the giants and all the stuff and the stuff that's going on underground and the secret bases. Is it true? It just might be, maybe more than we know. And what's interesting is, usually we get a guy with a suit tie and a microphone telling us about the devil, right? But it's just a little bit deeper than that. We hear either Satan or Lucifer, right? We never hear about Belial, who's really the one who tries to force magic onto everyone. A lot of these secret societies, they all get infiltrated. They get literally infiltrated through the auras, and this is what's happened to the religion. And almost all of us are literally intertwined on some level with, they call them klippa, where we're born into these physical worlds. They actually say the earth is a place of purification and rectification of the soul. That actually may be really true. The text, if anybody wants to go down the rabbit hole on that one, this is a really cool text. It's called the Sharar Hagilgam, which Sharar just means gate, Hagilgam means cycling. And boy, I'll tell you what, when you get done reading this one, you really, bend your noodle around. There's another one called the Nefesh Hasitzim. Now that's a strange word. Nefesh actually means the lower conscious mind. And one of my favorite diagrams to show on this, which really relates to astrology, See, this big, thick dashed line is the demarcation between what modern psychology might say is the conscious mind below this line or the division, and up above is the so-called subconscious mind. But a much better metaphor might be this is the present personality. And here's what's really mysterious. And I don't know anyone who could answer this fully. This big, thick dashed line is also synonymous with this little mark that the angel is believed to make. We all have it between the nose and the upper lip. That's the kiss of the angel to make us forget where we came from. So that legend's actually, and I say that happens at first breath, that mark is made to divide the so-called conscious subconscious mind. But I think it's a lot deeper than that. I think it blocks us. We can go to psychics and intuitives and astrologers, and we'll get a lot of information for sure, but you'll never get it all. You can't see the vividness of 3 or 4 or 5 lifetimes back and where you came from. Moreover, it's really hard to see the Gordian knot that we all seem to have tied with our soul roots to all the people we interact with. This might not just be mom and dad and grandpa and grandma. This could be people we marry, people we fight with, people we give birth to, people we interact with, people who sue us or not sue us. I mean, it's complex. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you, but I can tell you the astrology is so accurate. It's creepy when these energies release. See, here's something even more cool.
Let me add something else to that before you go. I also believe in soul ties, that I believe every person that you've had sex with is then tied with you forever, like their soul in the next generation, almost like a relative. I think everyone that you've coupled with, let's say, I think there's a soul tie with those people.
Could be right. I don't know about that one. That's yeah. I mean, there's a lot of mysteries to the soul. The only thing I could tell you astrology is really good at is you can certainly see when the gates are opening for elements of marriage, divorce, diseases, prosperity. All this stuff is really amazing how it shows up. There's windows or gates in the astrology by the transits and the progressions and the what they call Vedic doshas. Those are time periods. So it's really stunning. Even location astrology, like you can take your birth chart and you extrapolate across the globe where it is you live and see, like, watch, I'll just show you this. Everyone will have different energies. And this is very linear. So people like this. And you can see up here at the upper left, that's latitude. And the next set of digits is longitude. So those really become your friends. So every person is going to have by virtue of their birth chart, energies that are imprinted across the world. I don't care where you move. You go to Europe, you go to Southeast Asia, you go to South America, you're going to have something somewhere. And wow, is it accurate? So you not only have the major planets, and everyone always says to me, Jeff, show me the best place to go live. And I go, well, there's a few more flavors on the menu than worst and best and good and bad, because there is. And all these horizontal lines are your own personal ley lines. So it's really quite mysterious, how powerful this stuff is. And again, it's not gravity. It's not anything like that. Even gemstones. I make a lot of talismanic gemstones for people. I get untreated natural gems, and I don't try and sell anybody gems, but I do a lot for people. I make talismans like the kings and they knew it caused auric field protection. And the gems, the crystals, have resonances like tuning forks to the various planetary energies. And it's, I think, a lot deeper than just frequencies. They're just like tuning forks. That's why natural untreated gems set at a really good time. I literally set them to your birth chart as a talisman so that the planet ruling the gem is well aspected in the sky, and then you set it when it fits your birth chart. You're never going to get a jeweler to do that. But
I'm sorry, Jeff, but can you do mine? I know you did mine when the last time you were on, but can you do it again?
Oh, yeah. Well, if I did you last time you were on, give me your correct spelling of your name and all that, and I probably got you in here. Where would that? How would I
Shawn,
say that?
SHAWN.
What do you want to look
KELLY.
at? What do you want to look at? The location?
The location and if anything changed since.
Oh, well, we could be here for a while.
The new
Okay,
year.
hang on. Yeah, I mean that stuff takes me a little time, but we can get there pretty quick. Okay, so Sean
Shawn K.
SH
AWN.
SHAWN. So, all right, we're getting close here. SHAW.
I see Sean Hannity. No.
Okay, what's your last name?
Kelly.
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 You might be in an older archive here. Let me see. So I got the name SHWN, right? SHAWN.
Yes.
And Kelly, yeah, you're not in here. So you probably are in an older archive because I do a lot of clients. So I might have, but here, let me crank you in again. So hang on. So what we got to do is SHAWN and KELLY.
Yes, sir.
What's the month of year?
The month. Oh, when
Yeah.
I was born?
Yeah.
June 4th, 1962.
6/4,
Sorry.
1953.
No, 62.
Oh,
He
62.
looks like 19.
That's not nice.
I know, but it's me. What do you
Oh,
want?
yeah. Okay.
Okay, 6/4, 62. At what time?
I do believe 1 a.m.
Oh, that's general. You got to get right on.
Oh, Lord, I don't know, dude.
Yeah, well, that'll be on the birth certificate. Where were you born?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Pittsburgh. All right. The land of Fetterman. All right.
No,
Oh,
Pittsburgh. Oh, I know. Pittsburgh, PA. Well, let me see if I can read this here. Hang on a minute. I'm going to see if I can't get a hit on this. Let me just see here. Yeah, you're born after one.
How do you know that, Jeff? Hello.
Yeah, just a minute. Hang on.
You know, can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you. Hang on. I'm trying to get his birth time. Just give me a second here.
Sean, you have your birth certificate anywhere nearby? You can actually look at it.
I don't think it has the time.
Mine does. Mine's upstairs. I know
Yours
that.
actually said the time?
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you talking about the
Oh, yeah, a lot
original
of
one
people
from
do.
the hospital?
Most
Yeah,
people have
yeah.
their birth time.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's on there.
It's hard to read with all of you on there, but I can tell. Let's see. You seem to be around 122, 20 something, 23. I don't know. 122, 23, possibly. It's probably going to be on your birth certificate. And,
Okay.
I don't even find birth certificates are that accurate either. And the reason being, usually when someone's born, you're born in the early 60s. That's before the movements of digital. That was all mechanical movements back then. And I got you about there. I could be off because, I'm not really concentrated. Let me just see if this is right. So where are you living now?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Oh, you're still in Pittsburgh. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
We're checking your geography.
So yeah, you're right next to a sun line. Now, if
Yeah.
this birth time is correct, you're not in a bad spot. See,
Okay.
notice if I place my cursor right on this sun line, which is to the west, it's actually in Ohio, just west of you. You look at the upper left-hand corner of the screen, you can see it's 81 West 03. So if this birth time is right, because if your birth time's off, this will shift. Every about 30 seconds, the planets move 7 miles. So, you got a little latitude. But if you were right there, if this birth time's right, that's like going to a concert and standing in front of the band with your pant legs vibrating on that sun IC line. It's really, really good.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
100 miles to the east is the front row of the concert hall. 2 is the back, and 300's off the radar screen. So they have a fairly, good influence to the east. But if you're west, it's much different. Again, right on it in front of the band with your pant legs vibrating. 300 miles to the west is the front row of the concert hall. 6 is the back, and 900's out in the parking lot. So they actually do work very similar to light and sound. If you've ever heard of the inverse square law, that's exactly how they work. So yeah, I mean, you're in a good spot overall. And then you got to turn on these. These are the geometry or geometric aspects to your birth chart. Wherever you see triangles, that think good. So you do have these have about 100-mile influence either side of the line. For the front row of the concert hall, 200's the back and 300's out in the parking lot. So the triangles are real good. Whenever you see a trine, that means 120-degree aspect. And that's like, again, going down the road with, your favorite music on and no traffic. Good luck finding that in modern society. But the squares are more like traffic. So you're not in a bad spot if this birth time is correct, because I don't know if I trust it 100%. I did get a pretty good hit on that. So you might be born at 122, 23. So your birth certificate could say 125.
I'm gonna have to look for that.
Yeah, it'll be on there. It's really important to start with that because and then you're going to have transits too, which are coming through. Location astrology is amazing. It really is. It's quite good. So you're not in a bad spot. You're not in a bad spot at all.
Show us on the map a bad spot. So what actually shows you a bad spot?
Well, it's not a bad spot. You got to be careful. You see what's interpreted as bad are malefic planets. Like Saturn always brings restriction. Like he's got a Saturn ascending line running through Texas up through Oklahoma. So Saturn lines tend to have, and notice each planet has AS, MC, DS, or IC. That stands for sunrise, where the ascendant is, where sun rises. So that planet will take on a personal. So people that live on Saturn ascending lines tend to find it's all work and no play and a lot of responsibilities. It's a little bit like dragging a box of rocks up the hills without wheels. See, where he's at is good because he's next to a sun line. Sun lines are elegant. See, if I put the description on the screen, because it's on the IC, that's a fancy term in astrology. That means the fourth house cusp. So he's close to it. See, if we were to, that's a good line. Home and family and real estate thrive on that. So again, I don't have you plugged into all the charts. See, I spend 30, 40 minutes getting ready for a reading. See, if this birth time is right, you are east of that line by about 58 miles. And that's if you live right in Pittsburgh. I don't know if you live outside or north, south, east, or west, but just in general, you're somewhere between 55 and 60 miles east of it. So that's a good influence if this birth time is right. And you also have a Uranus descending line. So good and bad doesn't apply. Like here's a bad line. Okay, well, up here
would he be better off moving to Ohio? Like to get closer to that line?
He could depends where. See, he's got a Mars Saturn latitude crossing in the northern portion of both Ohio and Pennsylvania.
South Ohio, South Ohio, let's say.
Yeah, South Ohio, or right on these lines, because that's a good line. Yeah. See, like up here, he's got a latitude crossing. You can see where I'm reading this at 41 North, 4618. He's got a Saturn Mars. Plain English, that's like beating your head against the wall. If you want to do welding, kickboxing or military stuff, it's really good for that. But it's pretty intense for the average person to live on it. Then he's got a Moon-Pluto line right underneath that. Moon-Pluto lines are horrible. That's fingernails on the chalkboard. See, because the moon is emotions and Pluto's intensity. So, see, that's what I mean. So you don't just say good and bad, like what would be a good place or a bad place. You have to really analyze what it means. So like, watch, if I click on that Mars-Saturn line, even though he's way away from it, see, these horizontal lines only have a maximum 30-mile north and south influence. See, if you get right on one, that's like standing in front of the band with your pant legs vibrating. 10 miles north or south is the front row of the concert hall. 20 miles is the back of the concert hall, and 30 is out in the parking lot. See, so these have a very narrow influence. So he's not going to feel that in Pittsburgh, So this is, I call this line suckaroo big time. Look at bashing your head against the wall. It's horrible. Mars and Saturn. Now this one down here is Alice in Wonderland. He's got a Venus-Neptune line. That's what I mean. You have a plethora of realities that you'll experience going to these things. And, like Mercury lines, if he went over here on this Mercury line way over here, look at in the very eastern portion of whatchamacallit, either New York, or you could say the eastern portion of Pennsylvania, and of course, right down here through Maryland, he's got a Mercury IC line. What is that line? That's excellent for communications, completely different than the sun. See, here's what's really easy to get your brain around all this astrology stuff. See, if you look at this little diagram, everything is the circle, which is the seed of creation, which is the sun. It's also where our hearts are. The moon is the crucible. Dad puts seed in mom's womb, just like farmer puts seed in the ground, and spirit becomes manifest on the 4 elements of the earth. So sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight is really another way of looking at the cross, or the 4 archangels of matter, which is Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Oriel. All the rest of the glyphs of the planets come from the combinations of the seed, the crucible, and manifestation. Look at Mercury, the crescent of the moon, over the sun, over the cross. See, so it is really good when you move by Mercury lines. Why? Because just like this text says, they become very communicative. See, the crescent over the sun, over the cross. So once you get the nomenclature, it really works. See, the sun is the seed, so it's always generative. I've actually worked with doctors, and we found people who move by their sun lines, their health picks up, immediately.
I better move to Ohio. That's all I could say. I better move. But real quick, Jeff, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we have to thank Carnation for sponsoring the second hour of our show. So thank you, Carnation.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, I got another question. Because I'm always like thinking way out of the box. There was a time I know in, like, let's say astrological charts going back 1500 BC, whatever, 1000 BC, that they could only see 4 planets, and then they added a 5th planet, a 6th planet, a 7th planet. Now, obviously, what you got is up to date because we know there's 8 or 9, depending on whether you count Pluto. But does that have any effect on the fact that the ancient world that was talking about this and writing a lot of this, they couldn't see Uranus and Pluto, and maybe not even that doesn't affect what they said back then, maybe?
I don't know what text you're reading, but I'll tell you what, you get into the Vedas. The Vedas, and this is thousands of years ago, they not only knew about Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto.
Really?
Oh, God, yeah. They called them different. They were called Mandi, and they were the shadow planets. They were outside of the purview of vision. See, Saturn is all the visible planets. You can see Saturn clearly in the sky. Stand out there and look at it once you know where it is. And Jupiter, you can really see. So all the planets are visible at night at certain times, of course, if they're above the horizon. So the Vedas knew that not only were there the 9 planets, but they also knew that there were asteroids and shadow planets. They knew about the nodes and the eclipses of the moon, but they also knew that our solar system went around a central sun about every 26,000 years. Mm-hmm. Now, the flat earthers laugh at that, but there's actually evidence that our solar system is going around the central sun just under 500 million miles an hour. Now, I get a lot of hate mail for that. Well, we're flat earthers and we don't believe. Okay, it's still a celestial model.
Is that the precession, the 26,000 years?
It's about 25,700 something. Yeah. Nobody knows. I don't know.
But it's called a precession, right?
Yeah, it's a precession, the equinoxes. Yeah. And they also knew that our galaxy had a 250 million year galactic cycle. Now, you don't learn this stuff from sitting on mountaintops and camels watching stars. This is why you call it extraterrestrials. I believe it was angels. And the proof of that in my mind is this right here, this little diagram. The archangel Ratziel. See, if you look here, this is where the text came from. See, the archangel Ratziel was believed to be the angel that delivered to Adam, or you could say the first human, from God, how this place worked. And it explained that the astrology is not us, but the astrology is the amalgam of good blessings, curses, and all points in between that the soul is going to experience during these incarnations. And I think it was a lot different back then. The moon may not have had the phases that it had. When you take the astronomy of the Earth, and I get hate mail about this too. Well, Harman's wrong because it's not 23, 40, whatever. The bottom line is we are hanging here, and I defy anyone to tell me that it's not colder in the northern hemisphere than it is in the summertime, because that's why we have our seasons, right? Is the angularity of the Earth. And there are people who dispute that exact degree. There's many people who feel it's at a different degree and the magnetics have been moving and all that. But I can tell you it's got to be pretty close because of the geometry and location astrology. And no one knows why that is. I can tell you, I sure don't. There's not a guy in the sky with a string running it around the sun. It certainly isn't gravity holding it there, because gravity would not hold something quite like that at an angle. Yeah. Magnetics might, but I don't think hard sciences can answer that definitively.
It's interesting. Mars is on the exact same tilt as Earth.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, us and Mars exactly the same. And I don't think Mars has much of a magnetic field anymore, so it's not magnetics either.
Look at Uranus. It's 180 degrees on its side.
Yeah.
I mean, it's bizarre. This whole solar system.
So does that tell you that we slowly are tipping like that? Like, 5,000 years from now will be another 5 degrees or something?
I mean, there's legends that sometimes it happens all at once and sometimes it slips. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, we see the mastodons with, daisies in their mouth. Yeah. I mean, I think we've been to this barbecue many times and it may not play the same way. I think souls have a lot to do with this, because if you really jump back to the Sefer Ratziel and the Sefer Yetzirah, these are really ancient texts that talk about how everything here, they literally say if the seraphims, cherubims, and the thrones were not chanting the permutations of God's name, that literally the entire Yetziratic universe and I do say that plurally, would cease to exist. Everything is energy, everything. And it's much more than we know. I mean, quantum physicists are theorizing about torsional waves and all this other stuff, and they're not wrong, but I don't think we have a clue just to how complex it is. And I think it's held here in very specific states by the angels, particularly the upper angels that surround the throne, the Orphanum and the powers and the cherubims and the thrones and all that. So it's really deep stuff. And clearly, the astrology is the matrix that we enter into. And this gets into, I love this diagram here. It's one of my favorite. See, the lower conscious mind is known to be the nefesh. I showed you that book before, the Nefesh Hasitzim. That just simply means cramming consciousness into a body. And they say this is the lower present personality, which actually is not us. It forms in the womb. If you think about it, every one of us, no matter how smart we think we are, we only know what we know. And if you take a child and you bring them up, in a totally different culture, or even if I move or you move to some other culture, we're going to start having accents after a number of years that are commensurate with our exposure. So the lower conscious mind is like silly putty. And Dr. Emoto, who is I got to meet him, is a pretty cool guy. He passed away, but he didn't call him this, but he referred to the messages in water. Of course, he froze water. And he said, positive thoughts on all his books came out looking like sacred geometry. Fear, worry, anger, violence, discord came out looking like gobbledygook. Well, it's believed that we emit those thought form elementals out of the third eye chakra. This is why old Hollywood was right. What you are speaks so loudly, I can't hear a word you're saying. And that's really true, because we really, our physiognomy and our whole essence is far greater than the physical. And I really believe that this is the magic that follows us from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. That's that etheric energy, which is kind of the spiritual DNA of the soul. And look at the glyphs of the planets. All planets, glyphs, come from the seed, the crucible, and creation. Look at Venus, the sun over the cross, rules love and passions. Jupiter's the crescent of the moon over the cross, largest planet in the solar system. It's like a divine parabolical dish scooping up the energy and concretizing it into your life. They actually call it the blessings upon the soul. Mars, the planet of war, is the cross over the sun. Now they changed it to an arrow. And then look at Saturn. Saturn operates just up above the so-called psychiatric model of the subconscious mind. Previously concretized energies, the cross over the crescent of the moon. This is why it's really mysterious. You and I and everyone listening will die when K2, which is the moon's ecliptic south node, matches up with K2, and the north node matches up with the life force of Jupiter and Mars. We're out of here. And I've seen it. I don't care if you're 3 years old, 3 minutes, or 95. You will take the pipe when those very specific energies come into play. And it's very mysterious that I think the angularity of the earth has a lot to do with longevity. We hear about the saints and the prophets living hundreds of years. That's probably true, in my opinion. And it could be again. It seems the waves of souls coming through here have a direct effect on maybe when that axis tip will come.
Hey, Jeff, thank you for all that. But I think, could you give us a little preview? What could be happening in 2023 for us?
Yeah. That's all fun stuff. Yeah, I'll tell you, 2023 is going to be a shitstorm, for lack of a better expression. The reason why, the United States, I'll show you. This is Vedic astrology. This is the United States chart, and there was a man named Ebenezer Sibley, who was a Mason, who purportedly recorded the time that all the boys were dipping their quill pens into the ink wells and signing the Declaration of Independence. And they, I'm not claiming it's right, but I do go by it, and I find it's very accurate. It's 5:10 p.m. Well, the United States is really going through some nasty stuff. And I don't think we need astrology to tell us that. On the 17th of January, and I would tell everybody listening, go to my YouTube channel. It's Jeff Harman Astrologer. I've got some really good videos that you can watch on this, and you can sign up and we'll notify you when new stuff comes out. But I got a really good video we just put up today and of the last few days on this stuff, where I get into what's going on. The United States has the Saturn's transit over the moon. That always brings economic hardship, and so on and so forth. And the other thing, and this is the biggest one, right before the Civil War, the United States had something called Neptune squaring Mars. And the Civil War broke out in 1861 right after that. Well, guess what, folks? We're there again. And you can see right here, about March 6th, is the final, that little square right there. You can see that date. That intersects with the United States. This is called a graphic ephemeris, so you can actually see when planets are direct and retrograde. So this interconnects with the United States, Mars. I don't care what time they signed the Declaration of Independence. This is going to happen in and around there. That is an aspect of subterfuge. And I think it's safe to say nobody believes in the elections anymore. Nobody believes anything these barefaced liars tell us in Washington, the District of Criminals. And it used to be District of Columbia, but they changed it, or at least I changed the name, because this is an aspect of subterfuge. And the Civil War actually broke out in 1861, just after this completed. I'm not saying we're going to get a civil war, but I think we're already in one, but it's much different than the past. And the other one we've got in 2024 is right here, the Pluto return. This is the sidereal Pluto return. We actually had the tropical right when Biden got in office. And what does this mean? Well, the Roman Empire broke up on the first Pluto return, just like the United States is having. See, Pluto returns to its position about every 240 to 250 years, and empires seem to rise and fall during that point. So we are in the most dramatic time the United States has ever seen. And I don't think we need astrology to tell us the borders being infiltrated by terrorists, cells and groups being put in here, the cancer that's rotting from within has been strategically financed and placed here. People who will do what they're told to do, or they'll lose their families. And if they do what they're told to do, they have a nice Swiss bank account with the IRS looking the other way. So we've got all kinds of stuff that the astrology is showing is lining up more intensely than ever before. And I'll show you a graphic on the United States here. I'm going to put up what we call a biwheel. Now, this is more traditional astrology. This is the United States birth chart on the inner wheel. The outer wheel right now is the transits. You can actually see the Pluto returning to Pluto here. See that? See it right there? You can actually see the degrees and minutes. Very, very close. And what's more importantly, if we switch over to an ancient system called primary or solar arc directions, this outer wheel is going to change to that. Here's the one that I'm a little worried about. Mars, by the way, it took 246 years, because that's how old the United States is. If you look, every single planet in this birth chart to the outer wheel has moved 246 degrees. Why? Because it's 246 years. Each degree equals a year. The moon, you can see OA54, that's the symbol for a conjunction. That means in 54 minutes of arc, the degrees and minutes of that Mars will join the United States moon. FYI, 1 degree a year, 45 minutes is 9 months, 15 minutes is 3 months, and 30 minutes is 6 months. You just break a degree down. So if we go back to that tool we are using and show the progressions, the United States has some exceedingly dangerous stuff coming in. When? Right there, folks. It's going to be right at the latter part. Actually, I have a precession on. It's going to be a little bit earlier than that. It's going to be right about there. It's going to be right at the end of November of 2023. But I think it's going to start happening right in here. All through the summer in. And I think they want it to happen. The owners, George Carlin was right, forget the politicians, you have owners. The owners, I think, are seeing the United States as the blockage to globalism, right, and the climate change ruse and all the crap they're feeding us about the farting cows and your diesel and everything else. The weather's actually getting colder. We're at grand solar minimum.
Yep.
And these bozos are telling us they want to put in these ESGs, or environmental sustainability taxes, right? So what they want to do is break the middle class. You know, Biden isn't doing this, though he's signing what they tell him to do. I don't think Biden and Harris could tie their shoes together and get it right. They'd probably end up tying together. But their fence posts, they were put in there to give us the illusion, and all of them are bought and paid for, in my opinion. And the few that aren't are worried. The United States is in big trouble right now.
I agree.
And if this Mars is, you're going to see. Everybody looks at right when it's exact. No. When it's within 1 degree, which it is. See, you can see the linear line as it goes to the conjunction. That's where it's 0 degrees. That's when the shrapnel really is going to be in the wall. But between now and then, this is a violent time. They are bringing in terrorist groups. The CIA has been involved with Al Qaeda forever. And if certain things come out, like Elon Musk is really a modern day Thomas Paine. He really, you remember Thomas Paine, he was considered the father of the revolutionary, movement in from the colonies in England. And I have a good video on my YouTube about that. And he wrote the book Common Sense, which many of you may remember from school. And he basically was the reason the colonists rallied behind George Washington. Well, in some ways, there's a lot of parallel with what Musk is doing. But Musk owns one of the largest tunnel boring companies in the world, and of course, SpaceX and everything else. But I think he's backed by a faction of nationalists, even though he is who he is, and he may not, be, everyone, has questioned him in one way or another, but he's certainly proving that he's exposing stuff. And just like that little weasel Fauci right now, that he's really getting exposed on the gain of function, and that this whole thing with COVID was probably a setup.
Yep.
And I'll be called a conspiracy theorist. But people were asking me for years, Jeff, what do you think of the Mayan calendar and Nibiru? I said, not a thing. I said, I can't come up with nothing on the Mayan calendar.
All the Mayan calendar did was identify that 26,000 year cycle. That's all it did. December 21st, 2012.
Did that.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, from what I've read, it started the new cycle. That's all it did.
Well, and nobody can nail down these dates 100%.
Yeah, I know. But getting back to Musk, in my mind, Musk is the Time Man of the Year. What he did by buying Twitter and exposing what they did was the most important thing that happened in 2022.
He's the modern Thomas Paine. Anybody that hasn't heard of Thomas Paine, look him up. He was an American hero. Thomas Paine was also behind the French Revolution too.
So what are the leftists doing to Tesla, right? To Musk? They're collapsing the price of Tesla. Do you think that that's a coincidence that that stock has dropped in half, 12% today, because he's used that money to expose Twitter? That's exactly what they're doing.
You bet. And I can tell you, I think he's backed by some very interesting people. There are a few people left who love their children too, and realize that if this doesn't get stopped, we're going to end up in full-fledged digital communism. And that's where we're going.
Those are the same people and groups that I think backed Trump 6 years ago, or 7 years ago, whatever it was, in 2015, and they've seen Trump's gotten into trouble. They're moving on to Musk, and they'll find another one and another one. Hopefully it's not Kanye West, even though he's helping also.
Yeah. Well, I could tell you this, next year in 2024, since it's already 23, we have an even worse one coming. This is the primary directed Saturn, the planet of karma, conjuncting the planet of war, right there in the fall of 2024, months before the next dystopiocratic whitewashing deal called an election. So it's really kind of creepy what's going on. I hope I'm wrong about this, but I have never, ever, you can't get these aspects twice. A conjunction happens once every 360 years. The United States is 246 years old. So when you look at the confluence of all the astrology in Vedic astrology, and this is more Egyptian orientated or Chaldean and Greek, it's very ancient. Nobody really knows. I don't even think it's fair to call it any of those. It's just ancient antiquity of knowledge to astrology. This stuff was, you find it in Egypt, you find it in Chaldea, Mesopotamia, Greece, all the way up to the medieval times. They knew about this stuff. They knew that the heavens, Galileo and Benjamin, for all these people were totally into astrology. They were called astronomers. Today it's, love, light, and clueless. Hey, baby, what's your sun sign? And this old stuff is not woo-woo channeling. It is mathematics and geometry. And it's very specific. It's actually a geometric science of the heavens to events on Earth. The Romans used to do a ritual before they sacked a city to chase the angel of the city away so they could sack it easier. So this is knowledge that's been around a long, long time, and it's still around in the occult secret societies. Why do you think we hear about the child trafficking and all this stuff that's going on, and the sacrifices? And a lot of people, that's conspiracy theory. I wish it were, but it's actually
that stuff goes on.
It's actually not.
Yep.
And there's some very demonic forces working in and around and through these people, and they hate the human race. They hate it. That Lenin had a thing on I think a plaque on his wall that said, "We don't care if we kill 3/4 of the human race, as long as the final quarter left becomes communist." And that's how these people think.
Yep. And we're heading in that direction.
Wow.
You bet we are. And I'm telling you, they would love to kill off 3/4 of the human race. And they tried it with COVID and all the
Yep.
stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
There was an attorney just speaking about why a lot of the flights are grounded. And that's because they're now finding pilots are passing out from their boosters and everything else that they've had.
Yep.
Yeah. How about that?
Well,
Nothing to
I
worry about.
remember a few years ago there was a show on Discovery Science or something about the planet. Well, after humans, the Earth after humans, if you remember that, and they were so proud to talk about how if all the humans died, how the planet would recover and the air would be cleaner and all of this. Well, for who? We won't be here.
Yeah, right. Well, that gets into the
But they
if a
were so
tree falls
proud
in
of
the
it. If
wood,
we
no one
weren't
hears it.
here, like we're the cancer of the planet, human beings.
I'm not worried about the planet. I think George had it right. The planet's like a big dog, and we're the fleas.
Yeah, and the planet self-corrects. It does.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, look at creation. I mean, it's really people, scientists and weathermen don't believe this stuff. How can you pour millions of tons of pollutants into the atmosphere and it's
Yep.
clear? I know. I'll drive from the land of the fruits and nuts here in
Self-correct.
California, and I'll head east, and you go, where's all this pollution going? The deserts are clear. You know, there is literally angelic forces. They call them the nature spirits that process this stuff. Of course, science will say, well, it's the chemical reaction of molecules and H2O and this and that and acid rain, which they are right. I'm not demeaning that, but it doesn't fit. Then that would mean if that were all true, why isn't the ground and all the rocks and the cars just rusted into nothing? There's a lot more divinity going on here than they'll
Yeah,
ever
if we didn't have all this carbon, the food wouldn't grow as quickly, plants wouldn't grow. You'd have all kinds of famines all over the world without the carbon. And
That's
they
right.
want to capture the carbon and get rid of it. It's the
They
opposite.
want to bankrupt us. See,
Yeah, I agree.
Stalin was running out of ammunition and men to go kill all the farmers. So what he did was he said, you know what? This is getting too expensive. Let's just starve them out. If you shut
Yeah.
down diesel fuel, trains, and trucks, and that's exactly what they're up to.
Mhm.
And if they shut it all down and get all the coal plants shut off, we're all going to be screaming, please save us, because we won't have food, we won't have electricity, and the grids will be failing. And if they cause enough terrorists to come in here and knock out our power grids and cause enough chaos, everyone will scream, please save us. Well, they'll institute martial law and put everybody on government stipend. And what do you got? You got a communistic
Yeah.
existence. You have
And
communism.
and Europe's even closer to it. They don't have the oil and gas for the winter, and they're telling people to cut trees down, and because you got to heat your house some way. They're even
Insanity.
closer to it than we are.
I talked to clients in different parts of the world. I thought our energy prices were high. I'm hearing people telling me 3 to 5 times they're paying more than what
Yeah.
we're paying.
I
3
agree.
to 5 times.
Yep.
Wow.
New Zealand, Australia, we've actually got it better here than a lot of places have
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And I think we always will until it collapses.
They're working on it. They really are. And the dystopiacrats are telling everyone in the District of Criminals, here's all the money you need. You do what we tell you to do, and you're going to have a life of opulence, and you can watch the crowd scream down there. If you don't, we'll kill your family.
Yeah.
And they're not kidding around. This is a mob that's way beyond, Al Capone and anybody like that. This is some
I agree.
dangerous dudes.
I agree. And I think the devil is behind all of it. I think it's a real entity.
I think you're right about that.
Demons
There's
are real, the
demonic
fallen
forces.
angels, and people have given their souls to this for fame and power here. And but we're here a short time. Eternity's forever.
Yeah. There seems to
Jeff,
be.
I'm so glad you think the same way I do. It's like because
Well,
as far as demons and angels, I think all of the unexplained stuff that we talk about on the show, paranormal, UFOs, abductions, I think it's all demonic stuff, and angels and demons. That's what I think it is.
A lot of it is. I really believe that. I really, really do. I think there's extraterrestrials too, but I also think there's what gives me comfort about all of this, in my mind at least, is I really believe that if these guys could, they would destroy the human race in a nanosecond.
Right.
They can't. They're literally. In fact, the ancient rabbinical texts specifically talk about the human soul actually, if it's visited by angels, not through magic. Magic is really dangerous. The spirits want us to do magic.
Right.
And there's a lot of grimoires and secret societies where they summon spirits and they do all this crazy stuff. Very dangerous stuff. Very, very. I always say to folks, don't get involved with that. If you can, by all means, stay away from it. But they literally do this kind of stuff right here. See that, and they do. Now that's an old pictorial of it from Manly P. Hall, but they do this. There's literally texts like the Abratel, the Picatrix. These are ancient grimoires that is very specific about summoning the planetary angels and the Shemhemaphores, the Goetia, the lesser and greater keys of Solomon. Very, 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 very dangerous stuff. Because once they get your address, you end up in some form making a pact. You're hooked. You're done. And the thing about the ancient sacred holy magic, and see, if the churches were really interested in empowering people, they would tell you the truth. And that is, if a person purifies the soul enough, they will get one of the upper angels to appear to them and teach them how to control these guys. They literally are slaves, and they do not want anyone learning it. They don't. And that's what's really interesting. And the scripture cannot be broken. And if our fine religions, they really failed on that one. That one really got buried.
I agree. They should be telling people about this in their Sunday sermons and warning people, and so you understand it. It's like
you can't even blame them because their whole doctrine, they've sworn an oath to uphold the doctrines of the church or this or that or whatever organization they're in, and they don't even get a chance to learn it.
Yeah, it's like looking at creation science. I started looking at that 5-6 years ago. The more you hear about it and listen to their scientific explanations, creation makes so much more sense than it ever did to me, but you don't hear them talking about it. You don't hear them talking about it in any Sunday sermons. They don't even know about it. They don't know the science.
That's right. That's right. I had a real opportunity back in the 80s to get around some of the smartest theologians out of Rome. There was a guy named John Hardin. His name was Father John Hardin. He was one of the top theologians, and he had worked with, I forget the Pope that got shot. Who was that back in the 80s? John Paul. I think it was. Yeah. And he knew him. He worked right underneath him. And I had recorded all of these theologian talks at a place called Bellarmine Retreat House in Chicago. Very expensive, elaborate, money just gushing out of that place. And there's a lot going on there. And I don't want to say too much because I'm on the air, but I can just tell you, I real quickly got to the point where, listen, folks, I'll do my business. I'll give you your product and you move on, because there's some very questionable behavior that I caught. And anyone who thinks that there isn't a little more stuff going on with sex there has got to look at it. And I just don't go there at all.
Everywhere.
And I can tell you that, I'm not accusing everyone there of it. What I am saying is that I saw enough to really raise an eyebrow in certain circles. I'll just say that. And I don't want to say who or with what or any organization, but it wasn't him. It wasn't that Father John Hart, because I don't want to get a lawsuit here from the church over that. Mr. Harman, you've been sued for.
Don't worry, they're not watching. They're not watching this show.
Yeah, well, it wasn't that, but I in the circles of that whole genre, I did see things in certain places. I'll just say that I thought were, a little bit like the church has been accused of, pedophilia and stuff like that. And I don't like that stuff. Talk about raising a hair on my back, that'll do it. And again, there's a demonic force. Malachi Martin actually met with M. Scott Peck, and he was the man who wrote the book, The People of the Lie and the Road Less Traveled. He's a psychiatrist. I think he just passed away. It was quite odd.
Yeah, it was about 2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And Malachi Martin told him, he said, I know you're writing this book, People of the Lie, about evil. And he was telling him all kinds of very, very fascinating stuff about what was going on in these hierarchies. And there's a lot of power and a lot of money. And wherever those two seem to end up, you get some very questionable behavior in humanity.
You said the name of that book is People of the Lie?
Yeah, People of the Lie by M. Scott Peck. That was quite a while.
I've read a couple of his books, People of the Lie. I'll have to get that.
It's really, it's an analysis from a psychiatrist on evil. He and another psychiatrist I really love is Dr. Carl Wickland. Dr. Carl Wickland, here, I'll show you. He wrote a book called 30 Years Among the Dead, one of my favorite books. I'll just show you. It's on Amazon, and I call it Amazon. But here, let's see if I can find it. 30 Years Among the Dead. Dr. Carl Wickland was the man who, 30 Years Among the Dead. Here it is. This is it right here. And what a book. This is a doctor who graduated from the Chicago School of Medicine in 1916 or 1918. It's in the book. And he did not believe in anything spiritual. In fact, he's the man who popularized shock therapy treatment and lobotomies, all this stuff. He was hardcore science. And all his students said, we see ghosts and stuff around cadavers. And he's like, I don't believe in that stuff. So he graduates in Chicago somewhere in the late teens. And he comes to Los Angeles and becomes the head of the Los Angeles County Mental Institution right when, Will Rogers and Frank Capra and Valentino, that was the birth of Hollywood, the 20s and the late teens. And he was doing shock therapy treatment, all this really pretty noirish type stuff. So he goes to a party and meets a woman, becomes smitten with her and wants to marry her. Well, once he's married, he finds out she's a psychic channel. So this is like the other side of the world for Mr. Linear here, Mr. Science. And so he undertakes a study to see if she's rational or not, see if she's delusional in her channeling. And he finds that she took on a spirit who turns to him and says, you're the man who's been shocking me with all that lightning. And he says, well, what do you mean? And the person proceeded to explain a shock therapy treatment. They used to call them wind hand generators that went awry. And he knew, the person in his wife's body knew so much detail. He said, my God, there's no way you could have known that had you not.
Hit that read more right there. Hit the read more so I can just a little below, go down.
Oh, here, yeah.
Right there, that one. Yeah.
So what does he do? He then gets the guy in dialogue to realize he's dead. And the guy says, well, that makes sense. Nobody, talks to me anymore. And I'm in this dark place. He said, well, you must be possessing my patient's aura. So he gets them to go off, quote unquote, into the light, or at least the realization allowed him to do that. Well, then what does he do? He goes back. The doctor goes back and the patient clears up completely. He discharged her in a very short amount of time. So the next 30 years, and this is why it has the morbid title, the next 30 years he spends with his wife releasing all these people who are deceased who didn't know. We call them ghosts. But the Shari Gilgam and the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedic scriptures talk about there's just myriads of souls constantly recycling back in and back in. And that's what astrology is. We're not our astrology. I think the astrology is us.
Yeah. Pull up the other book, the one about the lies from Peck, People of the Lies, whatever it was.
Yeah. Well, here, before I jump off this one really quick, a couple other books people might be interested. Go snatch this one. This is a medical doctor who got sick and tired of the prescriptions and the surgeries. She just passed away, a wonderful lady, died in her 90s. A medical doctor who became a regression therapist. The clinical stories in here of people who didn't even know they were passed away. Here's another one who got her license ripped out of her hands, Dr. Edith Fiore, The Unquiet Dead. This book's written back in the 90s. Excellent book. All about clinical trials for getting people to clear up. And I have so many clients who are psychiatrists and, I hear the stories in prisons and federal prisons and stuff that they tell me about. And I'm like, this person is possessed. I said, you bet they are.
Yep.
You can actually see that with astrology. So people of the lie, or hang on, of the lie, I think it's M.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, it's right there.
Yeah. So there you go. Good book. I got this book. It's a very good book. Wow, it's only $10. Look at that. Not bad. I'll tell you another book you want to snatch that's really good. It's called The Screw Tape Letters by the incredible C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, I read that. Yes.
C.S. Lewis, yes.
C.S. Lewis. And of course, Mr. Narnia and Lion, Witch, and a Wardrobe. This book is about a little demon named Screwtape who reports to his uncle, one of my human subjects just joined a religion. What am I going to do? Don't worry about a thing. We've taken good care of those religions. Somebody will come bustling up with a book about us that nobody understands anymore because we had it all taken out, right? And don't worry, they'll notice the hypocrisy and so sitting there acting all holy and thou on Sunday, and then they'll be screwing each other and in the rest of the week. And taking advantage. So don't worry about a thing. Get them to think about sex. Get them to think about this. It's really quite stunning. And C.S. Lewis actually says in here, he cannot validate where the text came from, nor whether it's fact or fiction. What an interesting book.
What is it called again? I can't see it. It's too small.
Tape.
Oh, the Screwtape letters.
The Screwtape letters.
Yeah, it's about Uncle Screwtape, the demon, by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, I read that years ago.
Yeah, I love C.S. Lewis. He was very, very smart. The scientists will sit there and say, water boils at 200 and something degrees, 212, right? And he says, that's great. I wanted a cup of coffee or a cup of tea.
Yeah, he wasn't a believer. He was, and then he turned, right? He turned into a believer.
Yeah, him and who was the Lord of the Rings writer? Not Tolstoy. Tolkien. Yeah. They became very good friends in a pub and started collaborating on a lot of things.
Huh.
That's interesting.
See, one of the last of the great astrologers, which he's what we call the traditions, was a man named William Lilly. Lilly died in 1681, and with him kind of died the traditions of astrology. See, he was the last one. That whole era, there was a bunch of English and French and medieval astrologers that were all kind of dying off in the late 1600s. And that was pretty much it. After that, it was, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell. So, and astrology is the work of the devil. So it's like it all shifted, and the Industrial Revolution came in just a little short of about 90 or 80 years from then. And,
for about 200 years, it died off from that point to
right.
The end of the 1800s. And then Aleister Crowley got his hands on the Golden Dawn. And and then he started bringing the Enochian in, and Enochian magic, and Solomon's the keys, and all of that.
That's right. That's exactly what it is. And he stole all that stuff from Mathers. Mathers was pretty cool, in my opinion. He might have been.
Mathers?
Yeah, McGregor McMathers. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He was he and Waite were all the founders of the Golden Dawn. He and Crowley got in a lawsuit over the documents of the Golden Dawn. But that stuff they all found in a bookstall, which came out of Germany. And, the Golden Dawn is, again, it's a bastardized version of the true Freemasonry that came up out of Egypt. And, speaking of that, look at here. This is George Washington in the doing a Masonic ritual. They're not hanging somebody over that. That is a block and tackle lowering the cornerstone of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., when it used to be called the District of Columbia. And literally, they used astrology to lay this out. If you look at Washington, the whole city is laid out by a Masonic French architect. It is all sacred geometry. Mm-hmm. The obelisk, the domes, the streets, the geometrics of that. Look at the Pentagon. It's a damn pentagram. It's Mars. So it's all symbolism. These guys are steeped in symbolism. And Washington, he had a lot of really cool stuff around him that was very mysterious. They tried to kill him. Washington was fighting with the British before we defected from the crown, and I think it's 1762 or 64, somewhere around there, was the Great Conjunction that ushered in of Jupiter and Saturn that ushered in the Industrial Revolution. That's really when it started. And they said every officer fighting with Washington was shot and killed except for one guy. I think his name was Braddock. And Washington had 2 horses shot out from underneath him, and he never had a bullet hole in him. They used to have his coat on display at the Smithsonian, bullet holes in his hat. He never had a bullet hole on him, and they don't know why. And an Indian chief later had said, many years later, when he was with the Continental Army, he said, you have a great spirit over you.
What's that music in the background?
That's like getting close to the witching hour.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Anyways, he didn't have any bullet holes. And the chief said, you have a great spirit. We saw him over you, this great angel that was protecting you. He said, we tried to shoot you. We couldn't take you down.
That's funny.
And think about how they won that war. There is no way in hell Washington should have won against the well-equipped British, and he did. And
Yeah.
I think we're out of time, huh?
Yeah, we're getting close to the time to go. I want to thank you so much for joining us again tonight. It was so
Yes, Jeff, thank you.
informative, entertaining. I just wish we'd have got more into predictions for the year, but
well, we could have. Well, I think we did a little bit. I mean, it's a crap.
We have you back on soon.
yeah, definitely.
I'm not buying stocks on March 6th.
Hey, oh yeah, definitely. Well, I don't know about all that January 6th stuff.
Well,
so Jeff, if somebody wants to get I would like to get a reading. So I would contact you. Is that what I do on your website?
Yeah, the best thing to do is go to jeffharman.com. It's jeff@jeffharman.com. That's the website. And then you can also, I really encourage people to go to my Instagram and also my YouTube page, Jeff Harman Astrologer. And there's a lot of great YouTube stuff we're putting up there right now.
Okay.
We're working on a number of shows, which there's where you can see a lot of the predictions. We just did a couple of really good shows about the 2023 predictions. So if you didn't hear it here, you can certainly go there. And if you sign up, you get notices when we put stuff out.
Okay, and I know you're very you say you have to have your exact time of birth. Now, if you can't find that, where should you go? If you don't have any copies in the house, so I know there's 2 different kinds of birth certificates. There's the short form and the long form. So
try and get it at the courthouse or the hospital.
Courthouse will have the time.
Courthouse usually has it, Hall of Records. Yeah.
There's a state
If you
website
don't,
for
I can get it. I can rectify it if I'm on the phone with you or the Zoom.
You're welcome, Neil.
I can usually get close.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
but it's
right.
better if you start with the birth certificate.
You
Okay.
can usually the state has a website that you can request.
Yeah, but I don't think they have the long form because
okay.
I don't think they have your time of birth.
I know one thing for sure. You were born at a very young age.
Who?
Yeah, 0.
Okay, I would say you were born at a very early age.
For a while.
9 months.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay,
You're so
Jeff.
welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yes,
have a
you
great
bet.
New
Thank
Year.
you, and good luck to you all in the new year. Many blessings to us and this country. Oh my God,
Absolutely, yes.
this
Absolutely.
country is in trouble,
I agree.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it is.
and the criminals in the District of Criminals are not doing much about it.
Nope, they're not. They're
They're
not.
playing.
Okay, well, you have a great
We'll see
night.
what the Supreme Court does. They may surprise us. I hope.
That's
I
all we
hope
got
so.
right now is the Supreme Court.
All we got.
Good night.
Okay, good night.
Thanks.
Well, I think that was a great informative
Yeah, that
show.
was
I
good.
was too busy,
Yes.
too busy listening to even talk because he did a really good reading for me last year. So I'm hopefully he will be able to do a good one for me this year.
I
But
hope so too.
there's so many things we need to talk about, but we're going to have to figure out our guests for next week, who we're going to have on. But I think hopefully we'll get things panned out. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us at Chasing Prophecy Radio program. You have a happy new year and God bless.